All right, let's say our la'asok b'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And before we get to the words of Torah, we're going to get to a picture of Torah. Torah being used in a slightly more maximal definition beyond the first 5 books of the Bible. So, here's a picture. We're going to talk about 3 questions. The first question is, what do you actually see in front of you? The second question, which we're not going to talk about yet, is what do you think is happening? What's your interpretation? And the third question will be, what do you wonder? But let's start with, what do you actually see in the picture?
A guy hanging off of a rope of some kind. I think it's a guy. Looks like a guy.
Okay.
A woman in a window and a man hanging from a rope.
Good. You guys are getting very good at this is what's actually in front of us. Anything else that we see?
No, it's not her hair, but it reminds me of Rapunzel.
That's what I was thinking. Carol.
There's a lady in the balcony there, or the balcony opening from the room.
Yeah, hanging from Rapunzel's hair.
Well,
Looks like the rope is tied to a curtain rod.
I noticed that
it doesn't let go.
It's some sort of palatial, like some sort of palatial complex as well, because you can see the top looks very ornate, like with those really crazy looking columns. They're like super detailed, and the little bit of the room that we can see, it's got like what looks like some sort of maybe like a carpeted or painted wall, so some sort of palace setting.
You had what I thought. It looks like a man making a quick exit from this woman's bedroom because the father doesn't like him.
Well, I was thinking the same, because if you look, she's looking away,
Right.
and he's kind of looking down, and it's not as if he's trying to climb up. Almost looks like he's trying to escape.
Yeah. Well, I would also, if you notice to the right there, seconding what they mentioned, the palace, you can see it seems to be like a palace or some arcade and some arches and some sort of a bridge or something over some stream down in the lower right-hand corner. So it isn't an elaborate type of living quarter, shall we say.
Maybe that's a moat going around and he's going to fall in the water.
Yeah, could be.
It looks like the water comes around to the front.
Right, and he's got one foot on a brick that's jutting out there. And he's just
waiting for the father to go back, and then he'll climb back up into the bedroom.
He has no shoes on.
I was going to say, I think similar to what Charles was describing, that the artist to me must be Italian, because this looks much more like Rome than ancient Israel.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the architecture, and maybe even the trees look more Roman Italian than the land of Israel.
Well,
were moats used in Israel very often?
What?
Were moats used in Israel very often before Roman occupancy?
No, that's why I think it looks more Roman.
I don't think
because Michal and David were long before the Romans showed up.
Doesn't look like a moat.
I'm not even sure if they
looks like a sea.
I'm not even sure if they used moats in the ancient Near East. Did they do that, David?
It wasn't particularly common.
I see.
I don't see a moat. I see a sea, and it's near the sea.
Boats would have been a waste of water.
How close was Jericho to the Ardennes River?
It's not on the river.
Farther than this?
Yes.
That water is not the Ardennes River, and this is not.
No,
Jordan.
that is not the Jordan River there.
Okay.
All right. What do you think is happening? And those of you who have prior knowledge, thank you for keeping it to yourselves.
Yeah.
Well, somebody already said that he looks like he's escaping and she's looking backwards at whoever has come upon them.
If you see an arm outstretched with the palm down, quiet, or is she grabbing onto the bar there?
Wait, you not want us to see if we know what's going on?
That is correct. If you know,
All right, never mind. I'm putting my hand down. Thank you.
no problem.
Yeah, I would agree with Norma. I think this guy is escaping and she's trying to hurry him up. Looking back as in like somebody might come into the room.
It doesn't look like a bed sheet though. I mean, it looks more coarse what he's hanging off of. Which I don't know why she would have that in her house, but
Definitely a cord or rope. Yeah,
it
not a
looks
sheet.
more like a rope.
Not a sheet.
Yeah, I mean, here down here at the bottom, looks like a rope.
Yeah. But whoever made the knots seemed to know something about making knots. At least the guy who painted it. That's not a simple
At the
knot.
top,
That's
at the top, yeah.
Or maybe not.
Right there.
Sorry.
It's Romeo and Juliet.
It could be.
Perhaps Charles could tell us if that's a winch
Hmm.
or what that device is,
No,
or someone else, but I just thought he might have the.
no. Just to me, it just
Tractor.
appears that someone did a couple of knots in there. I can't. It's hard to tell. I wrapped it around this. By coincidence, there was a bar there, anchored into the wall, also for safety concerns. But no, that it doesn't appear to be a winch. It looks like someone looped it around a couple of times around the bar and ran the main cord through it. Some sort of it's not exactly figure eight knot. My scouting days are long gone by, so I'm not that sharp at recalling the names of all the knots.
OSHA wasn't consulted for this.
I was gonna say, it looks like it could have been a curtain rod, and the curtain is what's twisted that he's hanging off of.
Could be.
Okay.
That would show improvisation, not prior planning.
No, I do have to say that it amazes me in the many stories that you hear about people being let down, from a window, that they use like some item and that is normally that you consider kind of short, like how long could whatever is in her room be? But they always seem to let them down however far they want to go. Just a comment.
Well, if you imagine this person was maybe 5.5 feet tall, a good height, the average height for that time. So it's at least 10, 12 feet between the windowsill and that ledge. So figure the curtain is longer than that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I'm kind of wondering, is there another story underneath this? Or, I don't know, but.
Well, David is keeping us in suspense along with some of his other.
Surely there's another story. And don't call you Shirley.
So this gets to the third question of what do you wonder?
I wonder what's going on for real.
Yeah,
What's happening?
yeah. It's not a Hallmark
Why is the
movie.
gentleman running away or trying to hide himself, keep himself up against the wall? And why is the woman so anxious about what, who or what might precipitate there or come into the room?
In view of the question that David posed in the beginning, maybe she's caught between the parent. Her father isn't happy about her spouse.
Or her boyfriend.
Or husband?
Or spouse to be, or
Yeah.
fiance, or however.
I'm not hearing husband in this conversation.
Yeah, well, now my memory is becoming refreshed.
All right.
About the story.
So
What's the story?
what's the story? That's a good question. So first of all, this is a painting by the French artist Gustave Doré, I think that's how you pronounce it, from 1865. Here are questions. Charles, would you read Michal on 1 foot, please?
Michal on 1 foot. So we're going, oh, you read the questions. Michal was the daughter of King Saul. She was married to David before and while he was the king of Israel.
Thank you. All right. It's a very short description. But now we know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the prologue. Norma, would you read our prologue, please?
Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchi-Yeshua, and the names of his 2 daughters were Merav, the older, and Michal, the younger. The name of Saul's wife was Achinoam, daughter of, oh, these names are terrible, Achimaaz, and the name of his army commander was Abner, son of Saul's uncle Ner. This
All
is
right.
the biblical first book of Samuel after Saul was anointed king by Samuel, and he had given the Israelites temporary respite from the Philistines. His son Ishvi is also known as Ishbosheth.
Great. Thank you. So this is where we first meet Michal. Nothing has happened yet, but we've introduced some of the characters. We know who Michal's father is. That's Saul. We know her brother is Jonathan. We know her mother was Achinoam. We know that Ishvi/Ishbosheth is another one for brothers. We know that Abner is her father, Saul's army commander. So we're meeting some of the characters that we'll encounter later on in the story. All right, Justin, would you read Act 1, please?
Saul said to David, "Here's my daughter, Merev. I will give her to you in marriage. In return, you will be my warrior and fight the battles of the Lord." Saul thought, "Let not my hand strike him. Let the hand of the Philistines strike him." David replied to Saul, "Who am I and what is my life? My father's family in Israel, that I should become your majesty's son-in-law." But at the time that Merev, daughter of Saul, should have been given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel the Mechalite. Now, Michal, daughter of Saul, had fallen in love with David, and when this was reported to Saul, he was pleased. Saul thought, "I will give her to him, and she can serve as a snare for him, so that the Philistines may kill him." So Saul said to David, you can become my son-in-law, even now through the second one." And Saul instructed his courtiers to say to David privately, "The king is fond of you, and all his courtiers like you. So why not become the king's son-in-law?" Become the king's son-in-law of a king is a okay. When the king's courtiers repeated these words to David, David replied, "Do you think that becoming the son-in-law of a king is a small matter when I am but a poor man of no consequence? Saul's courtiers reported to him, this is what David answered. And Saul said, say this to David, the king desires no other bride prince than the foreskins of 100 Philistines as vengeance on the king's enemies. Saul intended to bring about David's death at the hands of the Philistines. When his courtiers told this to David, David was pleased with the idea of becoming the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David went out with his men and killed 200 Philistines. David brought their foreskins, and they were counted out for the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Saul then gave him his daughter, Michal, in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that Michal's daughter of Saul loved him, Saul grew still more afraid of David, and Saul was David's enemy ever after.
And you thought you had trouble with your in-laws. All right.
Jeez.
Let's get some context going on here.
All right, this is from the biblical book of 1 Samuel. To get up to speed, King Saul angers God. Samuel secretly anoints David to be the next king. Saul has depression, so David is chosen to play music for him to help him. Next, David kills Goliath, and Saul's son Jonathan, the heir to the throne, becomes very attached to David. David becomes Saul's general, but the people start praising David more than Saul, so Saul tries to kill David while he's playing music in the throne room. This brings us to our text. 1. History and stories is not inevitable. People and authors make choices. At what points could this part of the story have turned out differently?
Okay. So. To recap Act 1, because there's a lot that just happened in here. Saul says to David, here's my older daughter, Merav. You can marry her if you become the general and fight the Philistines. Because Saul is thinking, this way the Philistines will kill him and I don't have to. And David's like, cool. But when it's time for him to marry Merav, she gets given to someone else to marry. Meanwhile, Saul's younger daughter, Michal, has fallen in love with David. Note that the Bible's saying falling in love with someone, particularly women falling in love with men, very rare. So this is noteworthy here. And when Saul finds out about this, he's very happy because now he says, she can be the reason why the Philistines kill him. So then Saul has his courtiers say to David, you know, why not become the king's son-in-law? I know you should have married the first one, but try again. So David says, well, what do I need to do this time? And they say, oh, Saul says you just have to kill 100 Philistines. And then David's like, okay. So by the deadline, he kills 200 Philistines. And then Saul has Michal marry him, and Michal loves him, and Saul can tell that God is with David, and so Saul is more afraid of David than he was before because he hasn't been killed yet, and his daughter loves him, and now Saul is David's enemy, even more so than before. So, at what points could this part of the story have turned out differently?
The guy, I wouldn't trust the guy. If I were David, he offers me one thing. What is he doing? He's selling off his daughters and daughter as well. That might be typical at that time. He's just using them as objects of exchange to further his position or something. I wouldn't trust him. He baits and switches. There's not much sincerity there. What's the ulterior motive?
Well, Saul could have made an alliance with David instead of trying to kill him off. He was a powerful guy. They could have had a good alliance rather than a.
Yeah, particularly. Yeah.
Yeah, Saul could have seen that God was with him and then said, all right, I'll be with him too,
Yeah.
instead of saying it's on.
Anybody that killed 200 Philistines, Saul should definitely have been afraid of him.
David,
Yeah,
Yeah.
may I have permission to go vocal?
yeah.
I read Rashi commentary, and I don't know about Rashi commentary. I take that back. I read commentary on this story years ago, and it stuck with me that when God takes his favor away from a king, he withdraws his presence. God withdraws his presence from overshadowing the king with his grace. So in Shaul's case, it became a source of Mashugana. Shaul became a little bit crazy with knowing that he was losing the king's, the God's favor, because Shmuel told him point blank, "You've lost the favor of God. I'm here to point another. You didn't execute the Amalek commandment properly." So Shaul correctly anticipated David being his enemy, if you will, in terms of taking the throne and next. But what I wonder is why Shaul, even in his confused state of wanting to kill David, why he didn't think that God would protect David if David was anointed by Shmuel already anyway. So if David's in Shaul's house, if you will, and Shaul's throwing a spear at him, what makes him think that's going to be successful? And how does he think he's going to escape this? Shmuel was pretty clear about it. So I'm wondering just what's going on with Shaul's mind. And one more parallel is Yonatan had a miraculous event where he and his attendant were the killers of a certain amount of the enemy. It must have been the Philistines. And after that, Yonatan committed some sort of thing that Shaul decreed against the people, not admonished them not to do, that Yonatan didn't even know about. So he came and the people were supposed to fast, or the army or whatnot, and Shaul and Yonatan came back and he didn't fast. He didn't know it was in order, and he didn't fast. And Shaul was going to have him punished for it. And the people rose to Yonatan's defense, said he did this miracle with God's blessing, with God's help. So there's a parallel between Yonatan and David HaMelech going on here too. This is pretty much an ordained story to me. I don't think how I start thinking how nothing could go differently because God was all orchestrating this thing for them.
So your point here is that if God had chosen Saul, and then Samuel told Saul that God had now chosen David, then nothing could have gone differently because God was controlling the strings.
Yes.
Okay.
That's in a nutshell. That's what I say, and I gave you the whole story why I think so.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. It was too long for a chat.
To kind of give a different perspective, or in conjunction with that, when I've read this story, when studied it, it seems to me that Saul was first God's anointed, and then as the fellow who was speaking said, he displeased God because he didn't follow God's command to kill all the Amalekites. And I think, and so then David became the anointed. But what's really interesting about this whole thing is David always considered Saul God's anointed, and that would never, ever raise his hand against Saul. That Saul was, as kings in that day, are want to do. And I would say people in power, even in our day, are afraid of losing their power. So he was, concerned over, I don't even know so much that he was God's anointed, but that I think the turning point came when people were chanting David's praises. Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed 10,000s. And he was a bit jealous, I think. And I think this whole story is very interesting because the people around Saul, even his own children, could see that David's heart was dedicated to serving Saul and was not trying to usurp his power. But I think his own fears of losing power and his rivals and his competition is just another mark that he wasn't. It kind of tacks onto the whole Amalekite thing. He wasn't really following what God wanted him to do. He was more concerned about his own power and negotiations he could make and that sort of thing. I don't know if I was too clear about that, but anyway, those are my kind of thoughts.
Thank you. How might Merav have felt about being promised to David? So remember, Merav is the older daughter.
Can't think she would feel very good because if I remember, she was already promised to someone else. So she was just like a pawn.
I don't know that she was promised to someone else. I will double check. But she, from the text in front of us, she was promised to David, and then instead of being given to David in marriage, she was married off to Adriel, the Michal. But I will check to see if she was promised to someone else first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I read it as she was promised to Adriel, but given to David.
No.
So I may have misread it.
It's confusing. There's a lot going on. No worries. Nonetheless, your point remains that she could have felt like a pawn, being promised to one person, given to another person. Exactly.
I hate to say it, but that's kind of a modern thought, right? Women essentially were chattel in those days. They were always married off for political reasons and to create alliances. Wasn't that really their purpose in life, was to get married off to somebody that your father wanted to marry you off to? Not that I agree with the practice at all, but wasn't that really their lot in life?
I'm going to go out on a limb and contend that while, yes, it was pretty common to be married to whoever your father thought you ought to be married to, and if your father was someone with power, then your marriage would be done presumably to solidify power. Nonetheless, I'm going to suggest that women may have had thoughts on the matter, even if they knew that there wasn't much that they could do about it.
Oh, as a woman, I would agree with that.
Great. Other thoughts about how Merav might have felt about being promised to David?
My personal opinion is that he was young, he was handsome, he was well liked by everybody. He was both within the castle as well as among the people. So my guess is that she thought, hey, if I'm going to be married off to somebody, he's as good as, as any.
I want to say something. I don't know if he was handsome from what I've learned. I know he was 17 years old and he was a young shepherd boy. Who, not that he wanted to be appointed as the king. But because I feel like, because he was able to defeat Goliath with a slingshot, that's why Saul wanted him to marry him, to get on his side. And with it, and we, as we said before, the daughter had no say as to who she had to marry. So I think she was probably older than David because he was a young teenage boy. I could be wrong, but that's what I've learned. What do you say about that?
I would say that it's possible, and I will check the text to see if there's any indication one way or the other of Meirav's age at this point, or Michal's age for that matter, and whether or not there's any indication of David's age at this point. There may be some indication of David's age with some extrapolations, but I don't know if there's anything that tells us one way or the other, and there might be, of Meirav's age.
Like in the beginning of the text, when they introduced David and when they said that he's the son of Jesse, I think it did imply how old he was then.
It's entirely possible. I'll check.
Okay. I could be wrong, but I think that's what I remember when are you gonna go check? He's gonna go check.
Excellent. There's people put in a lot of midrash. I will say, for instance, that when Jacob deceives Isaac, I always assumed that he was like 16, 20. But if you look right before that, it says that Esau was 40 and Jacob was Esau's twin. So that puts a whole different spin on this when you think about that. So sometimes I know I make assumptions about people's ages, and then the text gives me indications like, whoa, did not see that coming. Not how I thought about it. So we'll see. You'll drop it in the chat or speak up when you find something in the text.
I always thought that Meirav did not want to marry David and ran away and married somebody else so that David was stuck with Michal, who loved him.
So that, Herb, under that scenario, was she doing it specifically because she knew that her sister loved him and she didn't love him, so she ran away? Or she ran away because she didn't love him, and as it happened, her sister who did love him got to marry him?
For whatever reason, she didn't want David and she ran away. I don't know the reason why she didn't want him, except maybe she didn't like him. She thought he was too much of an egotist, or he was too young for her, or who knows what.
Where does it say she ran away?
I can't read a woman's mind.
Right. Because she was given in marriage to Adriel. I don't know why, but after all, Saul, right in the verse 17, Saul is thinking, and I don't know, well, it says he said, but I suppose he didn't say it out loud to his daughter or to David, let the Philistines kill him off, because after all, he has other plans for Saul than that he should father his grandchildren. Am I wrong about that?
Are you asking me, or are you asking
Yes,
her?
I'm asking you, because I don't know any of the midrashing.
According to the shot, the simple literal meaning of the text, Saul tells David, here is Meirav, and I'm guessing because it uses here is Meirav, that Merav may have been present at the moment. And then later on, and then in the same verse, Saul thinks, let the hand of the Philistines strike him. So I think your perspective of he is not the person I want fathering my grandchildren is spot on there. And then in verse 19, it says she was given it in marriage, not that she eloped. Now, it's entirely possible that she made such a massive fuss about being married to David that Saul was like, fine, you can marry Adriel instead. That is the world's newest midrash. And there is nothing in the text to confirm nor deny it. So who knows? Okay, and Evan and Zoya have said in the chat that David was described as ruddy-cheeked, bright-eyed, and handsome, but does not say his age. So presumably, if you're going under physical traits, that might appeal to you if you like that sort of thing. But Merav, who may have been around David, could have had other reasons that he didn't like him. Entirely possible.
Somewhat related to the narrative, I see this name Adriel the Mecholetite. What is Mecholate? Like, what is this place? Is this like, what does this word actually mean? Mecholetite.
What is a Mecholetite?
Yeah.
I'm checking the Hebrew. Mecholati, the Mecholetite. I'm guessing that's a place. It's usually refers to a place when it's in that format. Where that is, I don't know. I'll see if I can find out.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, David, can I say something?
Please.
I was actually just reading Samuel 18, verse 23, and something stood out to me in that verse that David said to Saul. He said, "Do you think that becoming the son-in-law of a king is a small matter when I am but a poor man of no consequence?" That stood out to me because didn't at that time, even though Saul said for him to marry his Merab, didn't he had to pay a bride price? And could it be possible that he could not pay for the bride price to marry Merab? And that's why she married somebody else, and Michal was the next in line, and the Philistines' foreskins were something that David could pay and could do.
So you raised the point of the bride price, and that helps me understand verse 23 when he says, "When I am but a poor man of no consequence." So I had interpreted that as I'm not of his station, of the king's station, or of the station of Michal. Like, why should I be considered to marry? And I think that you actually have hit on a more practical and likely reasoning for that wording of I can't afford the bride price that you would want. Which is then why the verse 25 says the king desires no other bride price than the foreskins of 100 Philistines. So I think you are correct about that. Regarding Merav, looking at verse 17, Saul says to David, "I will give her to you in marriage. In return, you be my warrior and fight the battles of the Lord." So it's possible that that he's saying, I am waiving the bride price, you just be my general. And then when the Philistines don't kill him, then Saul's like, let's try again. And let me put a specific number that I want this time. But it's possible there might have been more to it than that.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, good questions.
I know this has basically nothing to do with this, but was it common to like do battlefield circumcisions like that? Or was that like a common thing at the time?
I don't know. It's clearly they wanted some way of proving that you'd killed X number of people.
X number of like non-Jews, actually, right? Like
well, specifically that, I suppose. That's true. You wouldn't want him killing a bunch of your own people to be like, yep, got them all. So that could be why he went for that requirement.
David?
Yeah,
this
Frank.
this sounds a bit like the very crude way that some troops in Vietnam proved they killed VC or NVA. They cut an ear off. So asked, give me 100 foreskins instead of 100 ears.
I thought they cut heads off, David.
I mean, you're chopping it off with your sword and presenting it as a trophy.
I thought they would bring heads back, David, as a souvenir. Or as, you know, showing that.
I mean, technically they did.
Oh.
Okay, Justin.
Oh, boy.
So,
David?
Yeah.
Changing the subject so you don't have to respond to that comment. I'm reading this and Saul keeps finding ways using his daughters to do away with David.
Yes.
Which is very much what David eventually did with Bathsheba.
Yeah, yeah, same thing.
That's true.
So we just keep having repetitions of stories. I mean, not just here, but you know, in various places in the Torah. You know, fathers do things and then the sons do them, and
yeah,
never mind.
Yeah, it may be that David is like, oh yeah, that was a good technique. Didn't work with me, but I'll borrow it and see if I can get it to solve my problems. That is true. I'll note the comment in the chat that Diane found a commentary that says that Michal is the only named woman in the Bible of whom it is said that she loves a man. All right. I'm going to read the other two questions because I have a feeling they're going to take us till the end of our time, and you can respond to either question that you want. How might David have felt when his promised wife, for whom he had fulfilled the stipulations, was given to someone else? And how might Michal have felt when the man she loved did not end up marrying her sister? So we've looked at the Meirav episode from Meirav's perspective. Now consider it either from David's or Michal's perspective. how might they have felt?
Well, David's perspective, if all he really wanted was to get the backing of another tribe, because Saul was a Benjaminite and he was a Judahite. So if you make it a what would be called a dynastic marriage, why would he care which sister? And in fact, if a younger sister might be considered more pliable, it would be better for him. He didn't treat any of his wives particularly well.
All right. So maybe he didn't care. We don't know how, there's nothing that tells us David's perspectives or thoughts on Meirav. So if we expand the question to how might David have felt before, or once he found out that he would get to marry Michal potentially, he might not have cared. If we narrow the question to how might he have felt after Meirav was married to someone else, before he got another chance, that's a different question, which you could answer either way. I see there are comments in the chat. Michal, who loved David, must have been relieved when Meirav did not marry him. Probably would be jubilant. Other thoughts?
Well, I would think, because it said, who am I and what is my life? Meaning like when he said, like being the son-in-law of a king is no small feat, that he's a very humble man. So I don't know if it was whether he cared or not. Maybe he didn't even feel like he was worthy enough to marry her.
I wasn't sure if he was being humble or maybe he was trying to, I don't know, try to barter or, try to downplay it, if possibly.
I see. I always took it as David, his weakness was women, there's no doubt. Like as he ran into women and he saw that they were beautiful, he couldn't resist the temptation. But he never came across to me as like just a pompous like guy who, was haughty or anything like that.
He becomes like that as his Isha.
I see. I never took him.
That's, think so.
Okay. So I think this is a good stopping point. Going to end the recording.